UFC Vegas 86 betting and DraftKings show. We have 14 fights currently scheduled for this Saturday afternoon. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. Kicking things off in the bantamweight division, we have Daniel Marcos, a minus 250 favorite. The comeback on Richie Lang is plus 200. And this is one right off the bat that I think Marcos kind of stands out on DraftKings above that 9K range because there's multiple fighters that I like to target in that range. Daniel Marcos is not one of them. Neither is Loma Lukbunme, who we'll get to later, but I think those two kind of stick out like sore thumbs in terms of maybe just not having quite the ceiling as the people they're priced around. But in terms of the matchup, I do think this is going to start out pretty competitively. We'll start on the Marcos side. He previously fought on Dana White's Contender Series. He's a 15-0 prospect. He's coming off that win over Davey Grant. A lot of people thought he lost that fight. I thought he lost that fight as well. But nonetheless, he keeps the undefeated record. I was also kind of discouraged that the volume that we typically see from Daniel Marcos was just not there against Davey Grant. I don't know if it was just something about Grant's kind of awkward striking style that Marcos couldn't really get a read, but it just seemed like he wasn't throwing as much as he usually did. And then on the other side of this matchup, Richie Lang is a fighter that I think is pretty easy to read because we know what he's going to bring to the table. He's a powerful striker that wants to move forward and put forward pressure on his opponents nonstop. And that's even if he's eating shots while doing so. And we know he's going to eat those shots because his striking defense tends to struggle, especially as the gas tank starts to fade. And that happens consistently in a lot of Richie Lang's fights. That's why he's not really the best in terms of his decision equity down the stretch. We saw multiple fights, guys facing him started to take over in the later rounds. And I think that's what's going to happen here because Marcos has shown to have good cardio, pretty solid takedown defense as well. I think this fight plays out on the feet. And I think I lean with Marcos, even though I think the betting line is getting a little out of control here. I think the value side is clearly Richie Lang, and I do expect this fight to play out closer than that line suggests. But I'm just still favoring the Marcos side due to the cardio. I think if he turns it up late, he could potentially get a finish. So we're going Marcos by TKO. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Hyder Emil, a minus 185 favorite. The comeback on Fernie Garcia is plus 160. And we'll start on the Emil side. This is another Dana White Contender Series fighter. He fought on this past season. He's an 8-0 prospect fighting out of California. And he fought a very high pace wrestling, grappling heavy fight against Emra Sonmez on Contender Series. And that's kind of what he does in a lot of his fights. He just turns everything into a brawl. He's got some power on the feet, but he just wants to move forward and make it a dirty fight where he's just been able to break a lot of his opponents. I know people kind of think his cardio is suspect. I actually think he's got good cardio. It's just the fact that he's forced most of his fights to be fought at such a heavy pace that a lot of times he looks really tired, but he also does a very good job as pushing through being tired and still being able to produce some offense. Now, he is sloppy in some of those grappling exchanges, and he's nearly been submitted multiple times on the regional scene because of it. So I have concerns at the UFC level against better grapplers and people that are more defensively sound. But in this matchup against Fernie Garcia, I've never liked Fernie Garcia. I bet against him on Contender Series. He knocked out Joshua Weems. That's not really saying too much. He's lost all 3 of his UFC fights. I'm surprised he's getting a 4th fight here coming off the loss against Rinya Nakamura, where he was controlled for basically all 15 minutes of that fight for the most part. I think just because they needed somebody on short notice here, Fernie's getting the call, but he's a low volume boxer, doesn't present many threats to a guy like Emil who is hittable because Fernie just doesn't have the power. Just one career knockout. Like I said, low output on the feet as well. And he's never really been able to defend takedowns. So it's just a spot where I think Emil certainly has some concerns, but I don't think this matchup is really going to make him struggle here. So we're going Hyder Emil by decision as the official pick because the one thing positive that I'll say about Fernie is he's very durable. He's never been finished and he's very tough. So I don't think he's going to look for a way out here. I think Hyder's clearly going to be winning the rounds, but I do think it goes to decision. We're going Emil by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Zach Pauga, a minus 135 favorite. The comeback on Bogdan Guskov is plus 114. And we'll start on the Pauga side. For starters, he's just not a very exciting fighter. He doesn't really have a ton of power. He's kind of one-dimensional. He's primarily a striker, doesn't throw a ton of volume out there, likes to clinch guys, hold them up against the fence. He's basically known for being the only guy who was unable to finish Jordan Wright, took him all the way to a decision. And I'm not even sure I trust the durability. He was knocked out by Muhammad Usman, and that's a concern here against a guy like Guskov, who I think definitely has some fraud vibes. We saw him get exposed to a degree against Volkan Ozdemir in his UFC debut, and we know prior to that he fought really low level of competition on the regional scene, but the guy does still swing with power, and we saw him able to connect a few times with Ozdemir as well prior to getting finished, and I think if he does that against Pauga, he could potentially get him out of here, whereas Pauga, I think, doesn't really have as much finishing upside. So I think in terms of DraftKings, it's clearly the Guskov side that has more upside, so I'm okay with just leaning into that. And despite thinking he's kind of a fraud, just hope that he connects with one of those big shots early and puts Pauga's lights out. So we're going Guskov by knockout. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have my guy Jeremiah Wells, a -155 favorite currently. The comeback on Max Griffin is +130. And this is a great fight to target on DraftKings because we have two guys that are super explosive. You know, Max Griffin is known for not necessarily finishing guys, but he knocks down just about everybody that he faces, it seems. And then on the flip side, Jeremiah Wells is the definition of an explosive fighter. He puts everything into his shots. He's extremely powerful, but he's also got a very good ground game as well. We know he's capable of landing takedowns. He holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's very strong on top in dominant positions on the mat. So that's why this is one where I think either guy is capable of hurting each other, but where I clearly favor Wells is in the cardio department and the grappling department, because Max Griffin, yes, he's going to have that big power early, but we've seen time and time again outside of the first round, that power really starts to fade, and so does his cardio as well. At nearly 39 years old, it's not getting any better. I could see Jeremiah Wells really starting to go to the grappling as he takes over if the fight does get extended. We're going Wells by decision. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have Devin Clark, a -198 favorite with Marcin Prachniow on the comeback at +164. And this is one where you have two guys that are pretty untrustworthy. Devin Clark, not known for being the smartest fighter and also not known for being super trustworthy, but this is a very good stylistic matchup for him. He averages over 2 takedowns per 15 minutes. He comes from that collegiate wrestling background, and he's facing a guy in Marcin Prachniow who is a one-dimensional kickboxer. This guy does not defend takedowns well. He defends at just 54% in the UFC. And we've seen time and time again, that's the way to beat Prachniow, is you can take him down, you can out-grapple him, or you can knock him out because his durability is not that great either. I think Devin Clark has multiple ways to win this fight, and despite being historically untrustworthy, I do feel like he's a pretty safe play this week in terms of getting that win equity. I'm not sure if the ceiling is super high, but I think the floor is relatively high. So I'm okay with Devin Clark, even though he's a little bit pricey. I know it's a 14 fight slate, but I'll be definitely looking to mix him in, not necessarily planting my flag on him because we have so many options this week, but the official pick is going to be Devin Clark by decision. And up next, we have Loma Lookboonmee, a -270 favorite with Bruna, Brazil on the comeback at +220. And this is one I'm not going to spend a ton of time on because I mentioned before, we have 14 fights on this DraftKings slate. This is not one that I'm going to be targeting. Lookboonmee is one of the more expensive fighters on the slate. I mentioned in the beginning of the show, she kind of sticks out like a sore thumb in terms of fighters that I'm just not interested in paying up for because I don't think her ceiling is as high as the fighters priced around them. But I do think she is the rightful favorite here. Bruna, Brazil, doesn't really like to be hit. I don't trust her durability. She's been knocked out 3 times in her career. She fought against Shauna Bannon and looked okay there, winning a decision. But Bannon, I don't really rate super highly. And I think Lookboonmee is just kind of a better version of Brazil. She can mix in the takedowns. She's very strong in the clinch. And we know she's going to be active with those kicks with her Muay Thai base as well. So I think Lookboonmee, while the rounds may be competitive early, I think I favor her down the stretch. And I think the takedowns, the volume, I just think she's the better overall fighter. So we're going Lookboonmee by decision. That's the official pick, but I'm probably going to have 0 Lookboonmee on DraftKings. Next up in the welterweight division, we have Carlos Freitas making his UFC debut. He's -258 with Trevin Giles on the comeback at +210. And Freitas previously fought on Dana White's Contender Series. He actually fought my guy, Mitch Ramirez. I bet Ramirez at a pretty big number there, which didn't really end up being great, to be honest with you. Freitas just completely dominated that fight. It was very impressive, and the power is for real of this kid. He's got a lot of exciting tools. He's primarily a striker. He trains with guys like Kai Bohayo at the Fighting Nerds, and he's got a lot of tools with his kicking attack. He's got multiple head kick knockouts. He's 17-6 professionally. Most of those wins have come by knockout. He does hold a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but we have seen him taken down, controlled, and submitted on the regional scene. So I don't know if I fully trust his grappling. I'm not saying it's bad. I just don't know whether or not I trust it, especially at the UFC level. And he's facing someone in Trevin Giles who I've just never been a fan of, to be honest with you. Giles is low volume on the feet. Despite actually being a really good striker, he's got a sick jab, fast punching combinations, and when he actually lets his hand go, you see that, and it is impressive, but he just doesn't do it enough. And he's also historically got bad fight IQ, and his durability is suspect as well, because we know he starts to fade after that first round. Even when he's not putting a ton of output out there, the cardio just seems to fall off a cliff after a round and a half, and he continuously puts himself in bad spots on the mat as well. So I don't trust the fight IQ, I don't trust the cardio, and I don't trust the durability either. So even though Freitas is a juiced up Contender Series guy making his UFC debut, I think he's probably fine here just because I trust the output more and I trust the durability more as well. I think he could get Giles out of there if he turns it up late. We're going Freitas by knockout. That's the official pick. And next up, we have Rodolfo Vieira, a -115 slight favorite currently, with Armen Petrosyan on the comeback at -105. And we'll start on the Rodolfo Vieira side. I think I'm done with this guy, to be honest with you. Like, he's always going to be one of the best submission grapplers in the division, and his grappling is no joke, but you have to be able to get the fight there to be able to capture that upside, and I'm just not as convinced as I think some other people are that he's going to be able to do that against a guy like Armen Petrosyan, because it seems like every time I bet on Vieira or I play him heavy on DraftKings, it's like as soon as the fight starts, I'm like instantly regretting it. Like, this guy can't take him down. This guy gets hit too much on the feet. And I know his striking has been developing, so that's a credit to him. And I know the cardio's looked better than it has in the past, because early on in the UFC, he was a complete gas bag. It was like after one round, cardio's gone. I think it's better than that now, but I still have some concerns. But why I think I'm leaning more towards the Petrosyan side is because Petrosyan always gets matched up with these guys that want to take him down, want to control him, want to submit him, and he knows how to beat those guys. He's very difficult to take down, very difficult to control. The only person that's controlled him in the UFC was Kai Bohayo, and that's because Bohayo's very good at backpacking guys, and the other guys that have tried to take him down have either failed, or when they got him down, he immediately popped back up. That AJ Dobson fight, he landed a couple takedowns, didn't control Petrosyan whatsoever. The Christian Leroy Duncan, where he exposed Leroy Duncan, beat him in that fight. Leroy Duncan 0 for 3 on takedowns. So Rodolfo Vieira, a guy that I don't really trust his wrestling to begin with, he went 0 for 20 against Chris Curtis. I'm not sure that he's going to be able to get Armen Petrosyan down, and if he does, he better submit him early, because Petrosyan's not going to give him many opportunities to control him or opportunities to take him down again. And that's the thing with Petrosyan, is even on the regional scene prior to Contender Series, that's what he was known for, is like, the dude's cardio is good, and he's going to keep popping up, and he's going to keep coming. So if you don't get him out of there on the mat, I think he's going to take over, and I just think that's probably what ends up happening here. I know a lot of my sharp buddies are on the other side on Rodolfo Vieira, but I'm prepared to look stupid here. I like Petrosyan by knockout. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Michael Johnson, a small favorite at -125. The comeback on Darius Flowers is +105. And I'll start out by saying, combined, these guys have both been submitted 14 times professionally. These guys do not want to be grappling. They are not putting on a gi. That will not be happening in this fight whatsoever. These guys are going to stand and trade. Make no mistake about it. Michael Johnson, nearly 38 years old now, though, so he's definitely not as good as he used to be, but I still expect him to be the better striker in this matchup. He's always been a very good boxer. We know he comes from that wrestling background as well. The concern with Johnson is that his fight IQ has been historically pretty bad. The durability is very suspect as well. I mentioned the grappling, deficiencies, but he's also been knocked out multiple times, and he's coming off a knockout loss. So I don't trust the durability. I don't trust the fight IQ, and he's facing somebody in Darius Flowers, who I don't think super highly of, but I know Flowers is very powerful, and he's basically just a brawler. So I think Flowers is going to have opportunities to find the chin early. This could be a spot where Johnson, like a classic Michael Johnson fight, he's winning the round, he's winning on minutes, and then he gets himself finished, and it's like, well, GG's, it's over. And that's kind of what I'm going with here. Even though I don't think much of Flowers, I'm kind of hoping Flowers gets a big knockout victory, and then we can fade him in his next fight, because I don't think Flowers is really UFC level, but I think the power is for real, and I think these guys are going to stand and bang. So I'm going to side with the underdog in Flowers by knockout. That's the official pick. And up next in the middleweight division, we have Gregory Rodriguez, a minus 245 favorite, with Brad Tavares on the comeback at plus 200. And this is one where I definitely think it's going to play out closer than these odds suggest. And I feel like I've said that a few times on this card, but this is one of those cards where it's like, I think the money lines are wide, but I also am not like rushing to bet the underdog, if that makes sense. And I feel like that's kind of what this is here, because I do think the money line is wide, but I still do favor Gregory Rodriguez. I just think he's got more paths to victory here. We know he's very powerful on the feet. He loves to stand and bang, but he's got a solid ground game as well, averaging over 2 takedowns per 15 minutes, holds that black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And on the flip side, Tavares is coming off a decision win over Chris Weidman at UFC 292, and he's just a very well-rounded fighter. He's solid wherever the fight goes, technical striker, okay ground game as well, good takedown defense. So I'm not even sure if Hobocop is going to be going for the wrestling here. And if they stand and bang, I don't really trust either guy's durability. We know Rodriguez has been chinned multiple times, but so has Tavares. And I think Rodriguez has more finishing upside, more power than Tavares does. And I also think Tavares is more of like one of those thin margins guys, because he just doesn't do a lot in some of these fights to cement rounds. So because I think Rodriguez has more ways to win, and I trust the output a little bit more, I trust him to fight for my money a little bit more, that's why I'm still leaning with him. But again, I don't really trust him, especially since we've seen him fail as a big favorite in the past. So this is one where I'm picking Rodriguez, but proceed with caution, especially if he's going to be super popular on DraftKings. We're going to go Rodriguez by knockout. That's the official pick. And next up, we have Bellagi Oi, another Contender Series graduate making his UFC debut. He was originally scheduled to face Damir Hadzovic in this one, but Hadzovic just pulled out as of a couple hours ago. And we've got the announcement that Timothy Kua, who also fought on Dana White's Contender Series during week 4, is actually stepping in on short notice, going up a weight class to face Bellagi Oi. And this is interesting because not only does Kawamba fight at 145, he also fought this past weekend and won by second round knockout. So he's got very little time to prepare. He's up a weight class, and he's going up against somebody that I believe these two have actually gotten some training rounds in before. They've both been around the Extreme Couture scene. I do think this is going to favor Bellagi Oi. I think Oi, he's going to be the more physically imposing fighter. I think he's got more power as well. And in terms of the wrestling, we've seen both of them kind of go to their wrestling at times on the regional scene. I think it's going to favor Oi in this spot. So this is one where I think Kawamba's a solid prospect, and I do think he probably belongs at the UFC, but I think this is too much too soon. Maybe if he had a full camp, he could give this one a go, but I think this is going to be Bellagi Oi by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the middleweight division, we have Robert Bryzek, a minus 198 favorite, with Ihor Potieria on the comeback at plus 168. And this is interesting because we had Albert Duraev, who actually had to pull out of this fight. He was set to face Bryzek here, and now we have Potieria stepping in on short notice, but he's also dropping down a weight class. So I don't know, honestly, if this was a prepared move that he was already planning to make, but it is going to be concerning in terms of seeing if he's able to make the weight and see if this fight stays on. So definitely keep an eye on that throughout the week, and of course on weigh-ins on Friday. But I think in terms of the matchup here, I'm just not sure I can justify this new guy, Bryzek, who's making his UFC debut, who's fought basically nobody in terms of the guys that he's beaten. I'm not sure I can justify him being a minus 200 price tag, even with Potieria coming in on short notice, because I mentioned the level of competition for Bryzek. he's fought some okay guys, but the ones that he fought that were good, he lost to. He lost to Sai, who fights over in PFL. He lost to Kayak Brito, who fought on Contender Series. He knocked him out. Now, he is super powerful. His boxing looks pretty good, but he's facing a lot of these lower level guys that have been knocked out a bunch, and he's dropping them, and he's knocking out those guys. And that's impressive, but I'm just not sure it's going to translate to the UFC level. And even if it does, like, he's still basically just a one-dimensional power puncher early, because I don't really think he's got that great of cardio. I have total questions with his defensive grappling, and I'm not sure if either of those things are going to come into play here against Pereira, but I think because those exist, I'm just not sure that I would justify him being minus 200 in what I think is going to be a high variance coin flip type of fight. Because Pereira, even though he's proven to be not very good at the UFC level, he's faced UFC level competition, and despite what it looks like on paper, that last fight, a lot of people would have stopped that fight against Bellato. He nearly finished him, and some refs would have stopped that, and then, of course, he emptied his tank and didn't have anything left and ended up getting himself finished. So it looks worse on paper than it actually was, and I just think this is one where it's really just a super high variance fight where either guy can hurt each other early. So I'm okay with leaning into the underdog here. You just got to make sure he's able to make the weight and looks okay doing so on Friday. But I'm going to lean into the variance, into the underdog here. Pereira by knockout. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our co-main event in the featherweight division. We have Dan 50K Ige, a minus 175 favorite, with Andre Touchy Fili on the comeback at plus 145. And this is one where I like both of these guys. I'm a fan of both of these guys. I think they're going to put on a pretty exciting fight, but I also just don't really see myself getting a ton of exposure on DraftKings, because I could see this one. I could see Ige finishing. I guess I could see Fili finishing. Maybe. I'm not so confident there. But outside of Ige finishing, really, I think this fight goes to a decision. And if that's the case, I'm just not sure that they're going to be doing enough, because yes, both guys can mix in takedowns, but on the flip side, I'm not sure if either of these guys are going to be able to wrestle the other guy in this matchup, and I'm not sure if that's going to be the game plan either. So if we have a striking match where they're not putting a ton of volume, if nobody's getting hurt, nobody's getting finished, I don't know if I see the ceiling on such a big slate here. So I do favor Dan Ige. I trust his durability more, and that's the one thing with Fili is the durability, I think, is super suspect. We've seen him knocked out multiple times. Yes, we've seen Dan Ige drop before, but we've yet to see him actually knocked out. So I side with Ige. I think he's the rightful favorite here. We're going to go Ige by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our main event, as my guy Joe Body Bags Pyfer is a minus 250 favorite, with Jack Hermanson on the comeback at plus 205. And I'll start off by saying, you guys know I'm a big Pyfer guy, dating back to his days on Contender Series. And obviously, he's a legend for cashing that submission in round 2 bet for like half of MMA Twitter. So you absolutely love to see that. Now, all that great stuff aside, I think the love is getting a little bit out of control here against Jack Hermanson, who's a very solid fighter in his own right, plus 205. It's certainly tempting me. I'm not sure if I can pull the trigger because I love my guy Pyfer. I'm going to be rooting for Pyfer. But man, if Hermanson doesn't seem like the value side here in a fight where I think either guy has finishing upside, obviously Pyfer's going to have a clear power advantage. And I think Pyfer's the better wrestler as well. But the downside of a guy like Pyfer is a lot of times he's just looking to land that one big shot. He's not putting a ton of output out there. And in a fight that could potentially, go 5 rounds, in theory, that's not great in terms of being able to win rounds against a guy who's as active as Jack Hermanson, who's going to be mixing in the leg kicks. We've seen those affect Pyfer in the past. He's also a guy who's a very opportunistic submission grappler. He can maybe mix in a takedown or two as well, and we know he's going to be active on the feet. Now, the concern with Hermanson, and why I do favor Pyfer and think he should be a favorite here, is the durability. Hermanson's been knocked out 3 times in his career. We've seen him stung multiple times as well. I think it's only a matter of time before Pyfer finds that big kill shot and probably gets him out of there. But again, the last thing I'll say is if that finish doesn't happen in the first couple rounds, this could be a potential live betting spot for Jack Hermanson. So I think betting him live is probably better than betting him pre, because I do think Pyfer probably does find that knockout in rounds 1 or 2 at a pretty decent clip. So we're going Pyfer by knockout. That's the official pick, but I'm going to look to have exposure to both sides on DraftKings. As always, I appreciate the support, guys. Do me a favor and hit that like button and that subscribe button before you leave, and head over to fightnumbers.com, your one-stop shop for everything UFC, gambling, DraftKings related. And best of luck, and we will see you guys next week.